Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
I hope you don't get nervous because you got a lot of people listening to you right now, like 60 million or something. What is that number? It's crazy. It's amazing how you can see that right away. How many? What is the number? Wow. What is it?
Well,
wow.
I think in terms of people,
that's bigger than you said. You said 25, and you're much more than double that number, 25 million. I think you're going to be 60 or 70, and I guess over a period of time. Hey, I congratulate you. Do I get paid for this or not?
Well, Elon Musk is now the richest person on the planet.
More than half the satellites in space are owned and controlled by one man.
Well, he's a legitimate super genius. I mean, legitimate.
He says he's always voted for Democrats, but this year it will be different. He'll vote Republican.
There is a reason the U.S. government is so reliant on him.
Elon Musk is a scam artist, and he's done nothing.
Anything he does is fascinating to people.
Welcome to Elon Inc., Bloomberg's weekly podcast about Elon Musk. It's Tuesday, August 13th. I'm your host, David Papadopoulos. This week, we'll continue our summer series with a conversation on Elon's business ventures in China. But first, yesterday, arguably the most influential politician of the past decade sat down with arguably the most influential businessman of the past decade for a chat. And the result was, well, Trump-Muskian. A little glitchy, a little meandering, very edgy, and weighing in at 2+ hours, very long. The two men have had an on-again, off-again relationship for a long time, though it's never been more on than it is now. What with Musk's endorsement of Donald Trump last month and his multi-million-dollar campaign donation commitment. This joint X appearance begs a question, though. Have we reached peak Elon and Donald? To help me sort through this, I'm joined by two of our regulars, Max Chafkin, Business Week writer. Hello, Max.
Hey, David.
And Dana Hull, our top Muscologist here at Bloomberg. Hey, Dana.
Good afternoon.
Okay, listen. So before I ask you two for your biggest takeaways from this, I'm going to tell you mine, which is, you know, Max, it's not easy being a podcast host, okay? And herding the cats and steering the conversation. There were moments as I was listening to Elon get run over again and again by Trump. I felt like, you know, this is me trying to corral you as you were going off on some conspiracy theory.
It was kind of painful, especially during the first, I can't believe I'm saying this, 40 minutes or so, when Elon really struggled to get a word in edgewise, where he kept, you know, trying, like a good host, trying to direct the conversation to maybe to matters of policy or really to anything else that you wouldn't hear in a Trump rally. And Trump really steadfastly refused. And the effect was what felt like essentially a sort of unplugged version of a Trump rally with Elon Musk sitting there on stage with him.
And Dana, so even before those first 45 minutes that Max is referring to, there was a long period of time where there were just glitches and delays and nothing happened. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people had trouble accessing the space, and then Musk tweeted out that they were under a DDoS attack, which there's no real, verifiable proof that that's what happened. And then I think this morning he tweeted out that they actually had some internal issues as well, but ultimately it got sorted. At the peak, I think 1.3 million people were listening, which is a good number. But it was very much in the beginning, it felt like DeSantis rollout 2.0, where you couldn't figure out, is this ever going to work? Am I going to hear anything besides this awful techno music or Muzak? And then it got underway, and it was a really late, it was just a really late night where, yeah, to Max's point, what I thought was funny was Elon kept trying to shift the conversation to his favorite topic. We're both the victims of, run amok lawfare, and, Trump was not having it.
How do we square those numbers of 1.3 million listeners or with this eeks that Musk sent out this morning saying engagement was roughly 1 billion?
Yes. I think we heard some of the difficulty in squaring that in the clip we played at the top of the show where, Trump is saying, there's something like 60 million people and there's this awkward pregnant pause, almost as if no one in the room wants to dispute it, even though it's not entirely true. So these very large numbers refer to people who have like seen a mention of this Twitter space. It's a very, very expansive definition of an audience. And I will say, 1.3, the number that Dana mentioned at the high point, 1.1 at the time of that clip that we just played, that's a big audience. That's a big audience. It's much bigger than the Ron DeSantis live stream. For X, it's large. For cable news, it's nothing. I mean, Fox News does basically 3 times that, like on a Wednesday night. So this is a real opportunity for Trump to reach Elon Musk, a powerful and wealthy billionaire, somebody who could theoretically donate even more to his campaign as he has. Musk has a lot of followers, but this was not, if he had hoped this to be like a big mass market play, that's not what he's getting here.
Musk did seem, as we were saying initially here, he did seem fairly deferential throughout. Was that always the way this was going to be, that he was going to have to kowtow to Trump?
I mean, 100%. Like, listen, I want to push back on the notion that this was an interview or a conversation. This was a campaign event. Musk started a PAC to help Trump get elected. Trump's campaign has been in the doldrums ever since Kamala Harris became the nominee. They need something to turn it around. This is free media. Musk is using the platform that he owns to give Trump this free media. I mean, he was trying out these new attack lines on Kamala Harris. Musk was chortling away. Like, at one point, Elon kind of like intervened and was sort of like, well, climate change is real. But like it was a very differential conversation. And the funniest thing was when Musk was basically pitching a job for himself in a Trump 2.0 administration.
I think it would be great to just have a government efficiency commission that takes a look at these things and just ensures that the taxpayer money, the taxpayers' hard-earned money, is spent in a good way. And I'd be happy to help out on such a commission.
I'd love it
if it were formed.
Well, you're the greatest cutter. I mean, I look at what you do. You walk in and you just say, you want to quit? They go on strike. I won't mention the name of the company, but they go on strike and you say, that's okay. You're all gone. You're all gone. So every one of you is gone. And you are the greatest. You would be very good. Oh, you would love it.
I feel like so much to unpack there. I mean, first of all, Musk doing Trump no favors with the potential union vote, which he has tried to court at times. But then also, like, this job, first of all, I think we should take what Elon is saying seriously, because maybe there's a strategy here. But you got to say, like, he's pitching, like, the kind of job that a billionaire really doesn't want. Like, he's not pitching himself for Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Ambassador to France,
NASA,
or something.
You could argue he's pitching
cool
himself
job
for Treasury Secretary.
He's pitching himself for like the kind of job that you dump somebody who you want to sort of marginalize, a blue ribbon commission on government, waste or something, right? That's not like a premier role in any White House administration. But I will say, for Elon Musk, maybe it could be valuable because, of course, his companies do a lot of business with the federal government. If he actually had influence in terms of how the Trump administration or any administration is spending its money, I mean, that would be very valuable. So maybe there's some strategy here. On the other hand, it really just felt in keeping with the very deferential tone of this conversation. Now, he would never ask for Trump for as big a job as Treasury Secretary. He's going to ask for a nice, modest job.
And Musk's companies have been enormous beneficiaries of, like, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed by President Biden. But there's so much to unpack in this interview. I just think it's really remarkable to see what the fallout is today. So the United Auto Workers is already cutting an ad, basically accusing Trump and Musk of being in cahoots together and being scabs. Like, this is at a time when, like, Michigan is a critical state for both parties to win. So it was a big gamble. I mean, if Trump loses, this interview is going to be seen as like the high watermark of going all in on him.
I saw a story that ran yesterday that said, Max, essentially what the Musk-led PAC is seeking to do is get out 800,000 voters for Donald Trump in swing states, which, if they pull that off, I suppose that would be a pretty large number.
Yeah, I mean, watching this live stream and thinking about this, like, there's a trade here, and Elon Musk from Donald Trump, he's hoping for favorable regulations and a return to relevance for X. And what Trump needs, right, is money. The Trump campaign is counting on outside groups to run its ground game, to knock on doors in swing states. And one of those groups is the America PAC, is this Elon Musk group. So I think there's on some level, Trump is hoping to reach voters directly. Elon Musk does have, he's a celebrity. There are people who really like him. There's a certain percentage of the population, maybe a small one, that will take his endorsement seriously. But really, this is about funding the ground game for Republicans. And he really needs Elon Musk to come through. To maybe Elon Musk isn't going to come through with the $45 million a month that we and the Wall Street Journal initially reported, and that Elon Musk later disputed. But he needs something. He needs a big number, because that's how they're going to turn voters out.
Now, one of the other things that jumped out at me during the chat was, and this goes back to deferential Elon, was when Trump on several occasions downplayed climate change and was talking about how the threat of nuclear war is much greater than the risk of climate change.
Nuclear warming.
I mean, it is bad. You got to admit.
And the conversation went down that path a few times. There was one in particular where Trump talked at length about his negotiations with the leader of North Korea. Let's listen to that clip now.
It was nasty at the beginning with Rocket Man and, all the different things.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden I got a call.
Those were some epic tweets, by the way.
Yeah, they were. They were
absolutely
epic everything. He said that he has a red button on his desk. I said, I have a red button on my desk too, but my red button is much bigger and my red button works.
The thing about this moment was that, as you said, David, it came in the context of Trump really going on and on and on about how overblown climate change is. I mean, I remember when Musk used to say that global warming is an immediate and existential issue, that we were going to run out of oil, in the coming decades. Trump said we have as much as 500 years before we run out of oil. He really played down climate change. He played down the need for electric cars. And Musk, for the most part, just kind of yes-anded this. He said, yeah, we got to stop demonizing fossil fuels. Thank you, Mr. President, for the kind words about Tesla. It was kind of wild to watch.
Energy started it. The price of gasoline. Now, your cars don't require too much gasoline, so you have a good, and you do make a great product, I have to say. I have to be honest with you. That doesn't mean everybody should have an electric car, but these are minor details. But your product is incredible.
Fundamentally, these are transactional men, and at every point in the conversation, you could sort of listen keenly for the transaction or the ask. So, for example, when Trump was talking about North Korea, Musk slipped in, oh, you sent some epic tweets. Obviously, Musk really wants Trump to tweet again. And then when they were talking about the cars, you could sort of sense that there was a hope there that maybe Trump would say that the Cybertruck was really cool or something. Because I think what we have to remember is Musk's embrace of Trump is turning Tesla's diehard early coastal liberal customers off from the brand. But this is a very big country, and there are plenty of people in red states who are now looking more favorably at the Tesla brand because their politics are now more aligned with that. And so, Elon is very eager to sell cars to red state America, and if Trump can help with that, if Trump's basic line is, well, not everyone needs an electric car, but Elon's got a great product. I mean, that does help him, with a certain segment of the population.
I will note Musk eked today that he also invites Kamala Harris on for a similar fireside chat. I don't know that she's going to say yes to that.
Why would she sit down with someone who is funding her opponent? It's not an actual level playing field. Musk is not an impartial person here. He is funding Donald Trump's reelection campaign with pledging millions of dollars and starting a super PAC. This is not it would be ridiculous for her to do that.
What Dana said.
Okay. Great stuff, Dana. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
David, I think we should change gears. Over the past few weeks, as you know, we've been on an Elon-focused road trip, traveling to various parts of the country and the world, talking about, Elon Musk's impact all over the place. We started in Silicon Valley, where Elon got his start. Then we went to Texas, where he now lives and does most of his work. And we've reached the next stop on our tour, China.
China, yeah. We've been a touch guilty on this show, Max, I believe, in not giving China its due, given how incredibly important it is to both Tesla and just the Musk empire writ large. This chat, though, will rectify that.
Yeah, you did this interview, a few weeks ago? And tell us who you talked to and why.
I spoke with Bethany Allen. She's the head of program for China investigations and analysis at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. And she was really great, very knowledgeable, very insightful. We talked about Tesla's mega factory there, the huge role it plays in China and globally. We talked about censorship and inherent contradictions in a venture like this. And you know, Max, we talked a lot about catfish. I mean, a lot. There was a lot of catfish. I re-listened to the interview this morning, and my biggest take was, man, there's so much catfish talk on it. It's so good. I'm thinking maybe we need a catfish podcast.
Well, you're making me hungry just hearing that, and I think everyone will agree. Let's cut to that chat with Bethany Allen.
Okay, so we are joined by Bethany Allen, who's the head of China investigations at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and she's an author of the book Beijing Rules that she came out with last year. Bethany, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
On this podcast, we talk about Tesla quite a bit. We obviously talk about Elon's broader empire a lot. We talk about different markets, the markets that matter a lot to it. But we just have not talked much about China. And so we're going to dive deep here with you on Elon and China and that at times fraught relationship there between the two of them. So let me just throw out at you to start with, when you think about Elon Musk in China, what are the first thoughts that come to mind?
Well, these days I think about the relationship of relative dependence that he has, and I would say growing dependence that he has on China, on the Chinese government, and on the largesse of the Chinese government, and on the Chinese market for Tesla's continued survival. But I also think about the vision that he had when Tesla opened its first factory there, that he viewed the Chinese market not just as a place that he wanted to sell, but also as key to his future global strategy. And I think that was a smart move on his part.
And when you say key to his future global strategy, how? By turning China not only into a producer for the Chinese market, but also as an export hub?
Exactly right. So the factory in which he got permission from the Chinese government to build in Shanghai, and in a first for any foreign automaker, he was able to build that factory with the permission of the Chinese government with no local joint venture partner. So that shows you the kinds of concessions, unique concessions that he was able to get from the Chinese government and how much they wanted him to be there. And now, if you look at the trajectory of that factory, around half of all of Tesla's global sales are from cars made in the Shanghai factory. And about a third of Tesla's overall global sales are in the Chinese market. He was able to take advantage not just of access to that market, but also of the cheaper Chinese components and the relatively inexpensive and relatively skilled Chinese labor force to really benefit Tesla and strengthen its global push.
That's interesting, Bethany, because when I think China, I think of a country that is increasingly, and certainly in the EV space, in conflict with important large markets in the West, the US, much of the EU, the UK. For instance, I know, or I should say at least I don't think, there are many EVs coming in that are made in China to the US market or some of these other Western countries. So then where are these Chinese-made Teslas going?
Pretty much everywhere else, certainly in Europe and any other market. I mean, the US doesn't permit Chinese-made EVs to be sold in the US, but a lot of other markets do, including Europe, including Australia, New Zealand, et cetera, and certainly in the middle income world, let's say. But I want to go back a little bit to what we kind of conceived of China as being in certainly the 2000s, and even for the first half of the 2010s. It was a low quality, cheap, it was the world's cheap stuff factory. Yeah. The Chinese government had this vision of turning China into a high quality, high tech manufacturer and eventually a hub for innovation. And there was a lot of skepticism even as late as 2017, if you're looking specifically at their EV industry, that they would be able to accomplish this. And one reason for that is that China's model of development is, especially its strategic direction, is quite top-down. So you get plans like the Made in China 2025 plan, which was a very central government top-down, here are our strategic industries and here's where we plan to dominate by 2025. And electric vehicles was one sector. And so the Chinese government basically subsidized the fledgling EV industry into existence. And really massive government subsidies and other kinds of government assistance helped a bunch of EV startups get started. It helped create a market for them by vastly reducing the cost of electric vehicles in China. And it was so successful at that now China is by far the world's largest market for EVs. Chinese consumers now are buying electric vehicles not because they are the beneficiary of subsidies which lower the prices now, but because they actually want those cars, because those are the best cars. They're the cheapest cars. They're the best quality cars. So the Chinese government in some ways kind of created this actually now organic market that is reshaping not just the EV industry, but the auto industry around the world. This is the context. If anything, we want to talk about Tesla, that it was the Chinese government supported market had very beneficial policies for domestic Chinese EV makers. And it was a very top-down push. That means that Tesla's entry into China also had to be top-down. Elon Musk had to go to the power brokers in Beijing. Yeah. And so at the time, Li Qiang, the party secretary of Shanghai, now the premier of China, and convince them, get their permission to come in and participate in that.
Bethany, on that point, when you think of Elon, or at least certainly when we think of him here in the U.S., we think of Elon, the libertarian, the free speech absolutist, the small government guy. And so it's a little tough for us to square in our brains that Elon with the Elon who will rush off to Beijing and toe the party line. But I guess you're saying he's proven again and again more than willing to do it if it means gaining access to that market and to that labor force and also to some of those China subsidies you were talking about.
Yeah, so Elon Musk is by no means unique in this kind of apparent hypocrisy. In fact, this is what the Chinese government has designed its market to do, precisely, exactly this.
To turn many of the world's biggest global leaders into hypocrites?
Well, not into hypocrites, but into people who are willing to toe the Chinese Communist Party lines or to support their core interests on certain key issues, even and especially, in fact, especially when those interests are in contradiction to U.S. or Western interests and U.S. democratic values. That's what the Chinese government has gotten so good at, using the sheer power of their markets for geopolitical reasons and to accomplish geopolitical purposes. Certainly in the realm of speech. So, every government leader in the world knows that if they choose to criticize China's human rights record, or if they call Xi Jinping a dictator, they might be endangering any kind of delicate diplomatic relations or negotiations that are happening. So you have correctly pointed out that Elon, seems to have certain values that he promotes when he's speaking freely related to U.S. culture wars or political wars. But in the Chinese market, he doesn't criticize China for having the world's most developed censorship state. He doesn't criticize the fact that there's no such thing as libertarianism there, right? But I will say that he's also very clearly not a free speech absolutist. The way that he has used Twitter, he's maybe fine with criticism of everyone else, but not himself. And I will say that in some ways that is very similar to the CCP's approach to free speech. They're perfectly happy for other people to criticize other governments, just not themselves.
Let's go back for a second to the Chinese EV market. And you were talking about the way China was able to build it up in a way that was not intuitive to anybody watching from afar. Does China's luring Tesla in help these other EV makers there in China take off? Or are those other EV makers in China taking off already by the time Tesla arrives?
That's a great question. And I have a quote here from a great piece by Li Yuan. She writes opinion for the New York Times about this. And I love how she described this very dynamic, this question that you're asking here. Why did China want Tesla in? Why would you welcome in a competitor when you're trying to get your own industry off the ground? And here's what she writes. As of in 2017, Beijing is seeking what the business world calls the catfish effect. Toss an aggressive fish into a pool so that the established denizens will swim harder. And that is exactly what happened. When you have a strong, aggressive actor in the market, it will force the other companies to really up their game. And it's not just a market effect. Having that Tesla factory in Shanghai, why would the Chinese government want to have that factory there? Part of the reason is that factory has become integrated into domestic Chinese supply chains for various components. Chinese companies that are supplying components to that factory, they have to step up their game. They have to learn these processes that has made Tesla so successful. And it creates this challenge and also this reward system across the entire industry, not just the Chinese EV makers themselves, but also their own suppliers. And it trained the whole supply chain market, almost like putting them into a boot camp or something. And that's exactly what we saw happen, is that EV makers in China became incredibly competitive with each other, with Tesla. I mean, the kind of cutthroat competition we saw in the past 3 to 4 years in China was, it was almost seemed like it was not backfiring, but causing harm to the companies because the price competition was so intense. And the result of that was very efficient, high quality, inexpensive Chinese electric vehicles, which now, ironically, so Tesla had this kind of catalyst role in the market there. Now it's being beaten at its own game, both domestically in China and around the world. And in 2023, we saw Tesla's market share in China fall from 10% to 6% approximately.
Who are those big Chinese EV makers who are taking market share from Tesla?
Yeah, well, the biggest one is BYD. In fact, at the end of last year, we briefly saw BYD overtake Tesla as the world's biggest EV maker. And BYD in China isn't just the biggest EV maker, it's the biggest car maker, period.
How much is the typical Tesla? How much more expensive would it be than the average BYD EV or some similar vehicle?
Way more expensive. So the average standard like BYD EV sedan that your average kind of middle-class family would want to buy is $14,000 US.
Okay.
That's half of Toyota's Prius.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at. We are talking like almost budget cars here. And Tesla Tesla absolutely doesn't have anything at that price point. And these are quality cars. These are cars that Chinese consumers are buying because they're just the best car at the best price point for them. And that's hard. That's hard right now for Tesla to compete with in China or elsewhere.
So if Tesla was indeed the catfish that got let loose in the Chinese EV market and the EV industry, I wonder, all these years later, has this relationship between China and Tesla benefited China more or Tesla and Elon more?
It has certainly been win cooperation, and Beijing's most favored slogan. It certainly has. Tesla's made enormous amounts of money in the Chinese market and through the increased efficiency and the way that they've been, half their global sales come from the Shanghai factory. And obviously the Chinese government has been able to achieve it has been greatly helped in achieving its goal of becoming a global leader in the EV industry. I think in the long run, you could say that Tesla has been building its own gallows, that by helping its competitors, it has helped its competitors become large enough and big enough to eat it. I don't know that the Chinese government is experiencing that kind of negative effect. There was I would say, a relationship, a kind of a mutual symbiosis between Tesla and China in 2017. And that has, in some ways, gradually, the balance of power has shifted to some extent towards Chinese government officials, because Tesla's global power, its global industry share has weakened, in part because it was a unicorn. It was out first. It helped create the EV industry to begin with. And there were always going to eventually be competitors eventually. So to some extent, perhaps this is inevitable. So I'd say perhaps in the long run, it will have benefited China more. But, Elon Musk, he's doing fine. So I don't think it's really harmed him.
Yeah, he does have plenty of money. We keep pretty close track of it over here at Bloomberg. I'm not worried about him going broke anytime soon. And the interesting thing in there, I would point out, Bethany, is that Musk was on the record years ago he was quoted being pretty disdainful and dismissive of BYD. I think when he was asked about them, I think he gave a big smirk and he said something to the effect of, well, have you taken a look at their cars? I guess that catfish, as you say, Elon Musk himself and his company, I guess forced BYD to start making better looking and more appealing cars. But given the nature of that Chinese government largesse and subsidies, is the Western world right in criticizing and pushing back and saying, okay, yeah, sure, you're turning into these dominant players and selling very nice cars at super cut rate, super low prices, but that's because, you're getting all these subsidies from the government. Is that a fair criticism?
Well, yes, it's worked out really well for China. I mean, China's demonstrated that this kind of policy, top-down government support policy, actually can create a truly innovative market, which I think even as late as like the early 2010s, people across the U.S. would have said that's just simply not possible, that like human behavior doesn't work that way. Well, that's clearly not true. However, the problem is as soon as those companies and those products start leaving Chinese borders, they start conflicting with a fairly neoliberal system, right? China's a member of the WTO. We have laws and regulations and agreements and treaties about who can use subsidies in what industries and when, because that's what creates a fair playing field on the international stage. And what China is doing, even though it has agreed to those rules, it is breaking them. And so it is giving Chinese companies and Chinese products, and by association, it's giving them unfair power and unfair advantage on the international playing field, and thereby giving the Chinese economy and the Chinese government undue sway because of those policies. That is really what we're struggling with right at this very moment, because I would argue that EVs are different than many industries because they in some ways relate to the eventual survival of the human race. Can we have a green energy transition? There's a moral component or there's a survival component. There's some sort of value there that's more than just who's going to make money from these nice products. And so there's a whole group of people in the US and elsewhere saying, look, it's incredibly selfish for us to complain about how successful Chinese EVs are. They might be helping save the planet. But the problem is that because of the Chinese government subsidies and other benefits, including, by the way that the Chinese government has gone in and locked up the rare earths and lithium and stuff needed for some of these technologies around the world, thus blocking out other countries. Another problem is something we haven't raised yet, but we must, is that the Chinese electric vehicle makers and especially batteries, their production is closely tied to forced labor in Xinjiang, which is part of a campaign of genocide that the Chinese government is currently perpetrating against Uyghurs and other Muslim minority groups in Xinjiang. So the whole auto industry, the EV industry in China, is very complicit in genocide.
And when you say that the entire Chinese EV industry is complicit in that, does that include Tesla?
So not to my knowledge, Tesla supply chains, but so we've talked about what are the ways that Elon Musk is being incentivized by the Chinese government to do things or not do things, to bring his power and his sway in line with Chinese government and Chinese Communist Party core interests. What are some of those things? Well, I will give an example. In, I believe it was 2019, maybe getting that year not quite right, maybe 2020, so Tesla opened a showroom in Urumqi. That's the capital of the Xinjiang region, where the Uyghur homeland, where they are currently subject to a genocide. Why? Why would he open a showroom there? It's a far western province. Why? And the reason is that the Chinese government has a very clear, they're very public about it, policy to get Chinese companies and foreign companies to invest in Xinjiang. Because, among other reasons, if the Chinese government can say, look, what we're doing in Xinjiang has improved its economy, has brought industry there, look at what wonderful policies we have in Xinjiang, that's a way of justifying their policies there. And we saw, for example, Volkswagen, another automaker, open a factory near Urumqi And it's believed that the reason they did that was because by doing so, they curried favor with the Chinese government in Beijing, and thus were permitted to open a much more important and valuable factory near Beijing. So in this context, Elon Musk opened a showroom, not a factory, a showroom in Urumqi. One thing we haven't touched on, and I really want to, is the issue of Elon Musk's ownership of Twitter. We've talked about the leverage that the Chinese government has over him because of Tesla. And now Twitter is not in the Chinese market. It's been banned since like 2009 or something. So for itself as a company, it doesn't have any kind of, the Chinese government doesn't have any direct leverage over it. But it absolutely has leverage over Musk, right? So that has brought intense concerns from people, certainly in the China watching space, about if the Chinese government were to really ratchet up the pressure on Elon, that they could exercise more sway over a very important virtual public square in America. It's a really key space, especially for political discussions, especially for election discussions, and for disinformation operations. And what happened after Elon Musk took over Twitter is that Twitter stopped. It removed a lot of the protections around transparency for foreign government state-backed information operations. It became far less transparent. It stopped participating in some of these voluntary disclosures of inauthentic state-backed behavior that they're seeing on Twitter. And we know that the Chinese government is very active. There's Spamiflage, is this whole state-backed campaign that targets Twitter to support Chinese government narratives. I don't think Elon Musk has any particular incentive to not do what the Chinese government asks, or even if they don't ask, he has definitely no incentive to put Twitter resources into doing things that combat Chinese state-backed narratives on Twitter.
So Bethany, just to be clear here, you're saying that not only is this a risk that Beijing could increasingly lean on Elon, or in its body language and posture make clear to him through a wink that this is the way we'd like you to rule over there at Twitter. Are you suggesting that it's possible that at some level it already has begun to do so?
No, I'm not making that specific claim. And in fact, I've said the Chinese government could do that, but I don't think they even have to. The thing about the way that they use their market access in this way is that it's been like the world's most successful PR campaign. Everybody knows the kind of speech the Chinese government doesn't like. Everybody knows what that is. Mm-hmm. And everyone knows that if you do something they don't like, they can take away your access to the market. So what incentive would Elon Musk possibly have to spend money to combat narratives that he knows the Chinese government is in fact backing and propagating on Twitter? I don't think there's very much incentive there. And he doesn't have to be told that. I know that. You know that. Everyone knows that. It's clear, consistent messaging from Beijing. So even without that kind of smoking gun of the Chinese government telling Elon to do this, that, or the other on Twitter, the way the party operates, the CCP operates, is by shaping the decision-making environment of key actors like Twitter and like Elon Musk. And those incentives have already exist and already put in place. And so a huge issue that we face in this election and in the last two elections is the issue of foreign government interference in our information ecosystem, among other kinds of interference. Twitter is now far more vulnerable to that. Twitter doesn't take down Chinese state-backed bots the way they used to. They don't combat those operations the way they used to. And we know for a fact that Chinese state-backed information operations on Twitter are, in fact, involved in political narratives in the U.S. election. So there's a direct tie between, Elon Musk's, the bet he's made on the Chinese market, the assets he has wrapped up there, his ownership of Twitter, and how that affects our information space in the election.
Bethany, listen, this was really fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
This episode was produced by Stacey Wong. Naomi Shavin and Rehan Harmansi are our senior editors. The idea for this very show also came from Rehan. Blake Maples handles engineering, and we get special editing assistance from Jeff Grocott, David Purcell, and Manette Valeriano. Our supervising producer is Magnus Henriksen. The Elon Inc. theme is written and performed by Taka Yasuzawa and Alex Sugiura. Brendan Francis Noonan is our executive producer, and Sage Bauman is the head of Bloomberg Podcasts. A big thanks to our supporter, Joel Weber. I'm David Papadopoulos. If you have a minute, rate and review our show. It'll help other listeners find us. See you next week.